Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. It's a nice refreshing break in this hot weather to be doing a video from indoors in the air conditioning. Although for the background noise I've had to turn the air conditioner off. So what I want to talk to you about what's coming up next. So we've been through making lots of nukes, chasing lots of swarms, but now we're getting into the major part of the local honey flow here in Maine. And I'm building up my hives that I've finished splitting to a point of being ready for the honey flow. And I'm doing most of my honey production hives as a single brood chamber management strategy. Now, single brood chamber management does not necessarily mean that you only have a single brood chamber all year round. And what I'm going to do is show you with the diagrams, because it seems I can explain these things a lot better when I'm drawing them out than I can just using the words. But single brood chamber management does not mean necessarily that you're keeping a single brood chamber the whole year round with your beehive. You're going to have, at this time of year when the bees are bursting with strength to grow, you need to have that too deep hive body, too deep super capacity to let the queen sort of really let rip and lay all those eggs, 2,000 to 3,000 eggs per day. But once we start getting into the major honey flow, and that's starting in various places here in Maine, and I'd say we're just really starting to get going with that here now, then you start restricting the area that the queen can lay to an area that will keep a very strong colony going. And so a single brood chamber management. This gets more and more successful as you get nearer the equinox. We will be at the point at which it's much safer to be in a single brood chamber management. As we're approaching that time, it's still a little bit risky to confine the bees down to the single brood chamber. At least that's what I've found so far. I am relatively, compared to some of the experts out there, new to single brood chamber management. I've been doing a few hives for a few years as a single brood chamber, and I did quite a lot of my hives last year single brood chamber. And in some instances where I put on turned it to a single brood chamber too early in the season, I had swarms. Also, if you do a single brood chamber and only put foundation above the queen excluder, then you're likely to have a swarm. But if you can utilize the fact that the bees are building in a brood chamber and you're getting drawn comb and you get your timing right, you can actually have some real advantages with single brood chamber management. Number one is you produce a lot more honey. I would say that my hives, I'm going to average 100 to 150 pounds per hive of honey that I run this way, compared to if I had a double brood chamber throughout the year. I'll end up with between 50 and 70 pounds of honey from those hives. So I think I will get another 50 to 80 pounds more honey by running a single brood chamber management. Also, by having the brood chamber confined down to a single brood chamber during the summer and fall, now I'm going to be much more effective with my mite treatments. The brood is much more compacted and in a much more readily accessible place for your mite treatments to work much more effectively. That goes for HopGuard, Formic Pro, or oxalic acid. All three that I use are going to work much more effectively where the brood is compact to a single brood chamber. For single brood chamber management, it's also easier to manage. It's easier to do an inspection of the hive and see that everything is fine, because you don't have to look around and search for where the brood is in the brood chamber. You can go in, once you're into that single brood chamber at the bottom, there's going to be brood in 8 out of those 10 frames throughout the whole period, maybe even in 10 out of 10 frames. So managing that area is a lot easier. But there's two maybe drawbacks. One is the possibility of swarming. So your management needs to you need to develop a timing strategy which is appropriate. And that's why I'd say don't jump in with both feet and run all your hives as single brood chambers, too early until you've done it a few times, because otherwise you may end up doing it too early and end up with too many swarms. So start off with a few of your colonies as single brood chamber management and get the experience and then get the feeling for the timing for your particular area to see how well it goes. It really does depend on the honey flows that we have. The other disadvantage, of course, is that you're going to have to feed a lot more, particularly during the fall. You're going to have your bees going into the winter predominantly with sugar syrup in the fall, depending on the honey flows that we get. So we'll talk more of that later, but basically when you take the honey off the single brood chamber hive, you've got a 10 frame hive full of brood but next to no food in there. So you have to be really quick with getting your food feeding on there, and then you're going to have to feed heavily to make sure that that gets filled over the month of September, ready for the winter. Anyway, and that varies with the honey flow. If you've got a full honey flow going strong, you may fill up the majority of your 10 frame brood chamber with honey in the fall. But let's work on the assumption that there's a lot more feeding required. Anyway, let me draw some pictures for you so it will be easier to picture what I mean through the course of a year of single brood chamber management. So let's picture our colony in January, when we've come through with a single hive body, not January to April. And we've come through with a single brood chamber here, and in that single brood chamber we've got honey, and we'll have various degrees of brood in here. And let's take April, for example, with 4 frames of brood. So we'll say these brown lines are frames of brood in the hive. In May, we've now got more brood in here. So we may have 4, 5, 6 frames of brood, and still a frame or 2 of honey or so over there and pollen. But this means it's time for us to add a box to allow the colony to grow upwards. The queen just needs some space. During May, it's an intensive time of growth, and so we need that queen to start getting up this way and start building brood upstairs. Now we're into June, and our colony still is getting more and more intensive with more brood in here. We've probably got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 frames of brood. And by brood, I'm talking about open brood as well as cap brood. Of that, we might have perhaps 5 frames of cap brood and 2 frames of open brood. There may even be more. But we may still have some honey and pollen there'll still be honey and pollen in the edges. By this stage, we're going to be wanting there'll probably be 3 or 4 frames of brood up here. We don't want this to get too full too fast. So basically we manage it, if we have more than say 4 frames of cap brood up here, 5 frames of brood, we want to be starting to take any excess out, because we want to curb the strength of that colony, because we do not want it to swarm. At some point during June, and I'm going to say probably June 10 to 20 for most of these hives, what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be taking my honey super, and I'm going to be making sure the queen goes downstairs. And let's show the queen with a different color. Say in January, we've got our queen anywhere. May, our queen can be free to go upstairs and down. We could have our queen upstairs or queen downstairs here. Now we make sure that only the queen is downstairs we shake the bees down into the lower area here and we put a queen excluder here. Okay? Queen excluder is going to go in here. Now our 4 frames of brood are going to emerge and become a honey super here. And we're going to have more frames of brood here. Now we've got probably about 8 frames of brood downstairs. By the time we're into July, our base might be down here because we're going to have to add another box. Because what's going to have happened is this brood will be emerging and everything. And we've still got our brood down here, of course. It's packed with brood. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 frames of brood in there. This is now filling with honey. And we need this 3rd box on here to be filling with honey as well. August, I've seen hives that I ran with single brood chamber management. I would say that I ended up on average with 2 or 3 honey supers on the hive. And I'm talking about deep honey supers. Now, it doesn't have to be deep. They can be mediums, but you just have to be quicker to utilize the space. We've still got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish frames of brood down here. By this stage, though, there is no brood in here. It's all honey. And this is all honey. And this may or may not fill with honey. Come September, that's when the big change takes place. At some point, we have to determine how strong the honey flow is, how much help we need in refilling the brood chamber. But basically, I would say sometime in early September, the first half of September, we're going to take this down to a single hive body. We may still have 2 hive bodies here, just depends on how strong that honey flow is. Let's say it's one of these typical poor fall honey flows. So what we're going to have when we take those honey supers off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 frames of brood, we've got next to no honey in this hive. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put a feeder on top of the hive so that sugar, and feed them sugar syrup right away. Because this is going to be full of bees. And so this will utilize the strength of that hive. We're going to have bees bearding all over the front of the hive. But don't worry about that. Put these bees to good work. If they're out in the field, if it's mid-September now, and there's still a honey flow, they'll be bringing food in here, but they'll also be storing and displacing the queen so that the brood goes from being all over there down to smaller, down to smaller, down to smaller. That's what we want to have. And by the end of September, early October, we want to be, in October, we want this hive to have, by the middle of October, we've probably got a little bit of brood down there, and all of this is full of honey, absolutely full. And so that is going to give us all the honey that we need. That's going to be something in the order of 70 to 90 pounds, well, 70 to 80 pounds of honey. The whole apparatus is going to weigh roughly 100 pounds, but 70 to 90 pounds of honey when that's full. So now we're going into November. We will have no brood in there. It's only honey. And now we're going to put our insulation on the top and our bee cozies on. And everybody's ready for winter with our mouse guard on the entrance. Entrance is reduced. And during the management here, and now it's ready to go all the way back through the winter time. And I had over 90% survivorship on all of my single brood chamber hives, even my single nuke hives. But this is how the single brood chamber management works. Just to review again, in the spring, as the colony grows, you add a brood chamber on there to let the queen lay in both brood chambers. You make sure that as you're going through May and June, you don't allow it to get too strong. If it's getting too strong, you take frames of brood out, multiple frames of brood. Don't let there be more than 3 or 4 frames of brood up here until just before you're ready to put the queen excluder on. Sometime in mid-June, you're going to then shake the queen down below, put your queen excluder on, put this brood chamber back on, and this will become your first honey super. In July, all of your brood is confined to the bottom brood box here. Your second brood box, all the brood is emerging, and this is now full of honey. And you're probably, when that is 75% full of honey, you need your next box on, and so on. You may, in August or September, early September, add your third honey super on. Maybe this is going to be in July you need a third honey super. You just, like any other hive, you just monitor to see how quickly it's filling up. But down below, this is entirely full of brood. They will have taken almost all the honey out of this hive, this hive body, and made sure the queen has as much space as possible to lay here. Come the time we take the honey supers off, we need to make sure we intensively feed. That's a bucket hive top feeder. And so we constrict, so the queen is forced to lay in smaller and smaller and smaller area. And then by the time we're into the beginning of October, it's full of honey, entirely filled with honey. And next to no brood. By middle of October, we'll probably have no brood left in the hive. Perfect time to do your oxalic acid vapor treatment. Then for November, you insulate, mouse guard, prepare for the winter. When it comes to my mite treatment, I'm going to be doing probably a mite treatment is usually required sometime in July. No, not June, in July. I will also typically do a mite, and I will typically, because of the temperatures, I will normally use Hop Guard here. In September, 1st of September, I will normally use Formic Pro, and come October, end of October, I'm using my oxalic acid. And if it's still warm and bees are flying in November, I'm normally doing it again in November. So there we have it. That is my plan for my single brood chamber management. It's only double brood chamber for maybe 2 months, maybe less than that. After that, single brood chamber. It works extremely effectively.